watch a little TED Talk with each other. We're going to have a little time with that. And then we're going to go to 9 different breakout sessions. Each of the breakout sessions are going to not be identical because different people, but it's going to be the same agenda. And the hope is, we had 2 goals. We had 2 goals for the breakouts. That our facilitators will be excited to facilitate. We've met 3 times, they've worked awful hard. I'm just telling you that right now, they've worked really hard. And I know they're excited, they're nervous, but they're excited. And then the second goal was to give people tools and quite possibly maybe share out some things that you're already doing in your groups. So I think it's going to be a great day to get some things, a great day to learn some information, a great day to have a little shared experience with a video to watch. So I'll turn it over to Alan right now. Dr. Spiciotti?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here. Congratulations, 2 more days and we've almost made it. Then we all get to recharge. Yeah, I know. Big applause on here. I'm here to talk about our levies and bring everybody up to speed. We have 2 levies on the ballot coming up. The Educational Programs and Operations Replacement Levy and the Technology Replacement Levy. Both of those use a common word besides levy, which is replacement. Can you say replacement levy with me? Replacement levy. All right. These are really critical to the heart and soul of the school district and to maintaining the momentum we've been building, especially in the area of technology. I've been out in the community with a lot of our community groups and service clubs sharing information about the levy. And I oftentimes start saying, what do you remember about high school? What did you like? What engaged you? What are your fondest memories? Or what maybe propelled you into something that you still do today? And most of the time, it was the kind of things that we're going to see here that really grab kids. So this is the most important work that we do to provide a great, well-rounded, complete education for our kids. So I'm here to share information. It's our job as educators in the system to provide information so that we have a well-informed electorate. I have complete faith in our community. If they understand what this is and what's at stake, that they'll be supportive of our schools. That being said, the February election is historically not well participated in. Last 4 years ago, when we ran in February, it was about 25% voter participation. So we really, really want to get the word out so that our community knows what's at stake and they'll be supportive. I'll give a disclaimer now, probably most of you have heard this before. We can provide information in our official capacity as a district employee, but we can't do the political action. We can't say how to vote. If you decide to be a part of the campaign on your private time, you can do that, but you certainly can't use district emails. So just for your own sake, remember to keep any of those roles separately. All right, and here we go. So when I share this with the community, and I'll do this right now, we actually want to be accountable for the great support we've had from the community in recent years. We start with just a quick recap. In 2014, the Auburn voters passed the first technology levy that we've had, and it has really transformed the district. I have the good fortune to be in classes every week, and I would say about 50% of the time, I'll see Chromebooks being used in a variety of ways that really support the educational process. You see them all the time in elementary. We have teachers who are able to give kids individualized assignments on the Chromebook while they work with a small group on a specific reading scale or things like that. I've seen first graders who are reading and doing their assignment, but they're reading to their mom who can access it remotely. Then you know how we use them in many ways at secondary, the power of Google Classroom and all that. It has transformed the district. The other thing I'll remind you, if you were in the district 6 years ago, think back to what your internet connection was like. Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'll pay later. It's true though. We were nowhere near where we are today. We had, we were doing the best we could, but we really didn't have the resources think of the Wi-Fi. It was typically in the library and a few different places in the school. Now every school, we have great connections everywhere, and we want to be able to build on that for the future. The second most recent ballot measure was the EP&O levy from 4 years ago. And at the time that funded 20% of our budget. You know that we have had a transition in the education funding system with Cleary. We do get more money from the state now, but there's a misconception that it fully funds education, and it doesn't yet. I'll show you some examples of that. This year's levy will be 10% of our budget, and it's a 10% that truly we couldn't live without. So I'll share a little bit about that. And then the most recent election, of course, was the bond that the community tremendously supported to build 8 schools, 6 rebuilds and 2 new schools. And really the bond projects is one of our best calling cards to demonstrate the district's stewardship of resources. So there are a lot of folks who, nobody loves paying taxes, but if you feel like the money is well used, it builds some confidence. So we're actually reporting out in the community to show the projects and their progress. So how many of you have been to the new Olympic Middle School, had a chance to be in there? It's pretty extraordinary. And if you haven't, I highly recommend finding an excuse to get over there. We're going to try to use it for some more PD opportunities and get more folks in there. It's just a phenomenal facility. We are building all of our new schools, starting with the one we're in right now, to a 100-year standard. So this will really be a community asset for generations. It opened on time and on budget. Doesn't mean that every last detail is done, but we had kids in school the first day of school, and you just look at all the projects around the region, that's definitely not always the case, but in Auburn it's always been the case. So we manage our projects well. Currently we are building 2 elementary schools, a replacement for Dick Scobie Elementary and a brand new school on Percy Way. If you head out of town past Game Farm Park across the river and up Percy Way, at the top of the hill you'll find this site. I'm sure a number of you have been by it and watched the progress. Both of these schools will open in September with new kids. We do have 2 committees going to assist with this. One just completed actually, which is a naming committee. So very shortly, we're going to release the top 4 names. We had 275 nominations. It was a really fun process to go through. I will tell you that Rocky Road Elementary was nominated, but it was not chosen. So the people laughing drive Percy Way and know what I'm talking about. It's a bit of a construction site right now. But it's going to be a fabulous school. The other committee is a boundary committee, and even though most of our building is at the elementary level, we're looking at school boundaries K-12. So that'll happen in late January and continue at least through March with a board recommendation in April. And the community will be hearing shortly about opportunities to join the boundary committee. All right, these are the designs of the next 3 schools that we're building. Love the elementary 15. It's out in the woods. It's going to be a beautiful site and school. Dick Scobie is really honoring the legacy of Commander Scobie, national hero, an Auburn treasure, a scientist, an astronaut. So the design specification for this school is a little different than many of our Auburn schools. It evokes exploration and aerospace, aerodynamic kind of vibe to it. It's metal wrapped, but it's a beautiful, beautiful design. This can be a great school for us. And then Pioneer Elementary was designed really with the design specification to kind of meet into the community. If you look at it up close, it's hard to see up here. It actually has a wooden exterior look. It's not literally wood, it's a new product that wears better than wood, but looks like wood. So it's going to be terrific. And you'll see we have 8 projects that are all in some stage of work, from soil samples and surveying to the finished work at Olympic. So we're going to be busy, but again, we've been able to be on time and on budget. We just want to report that to our community. There is a new school on Lee Hill too. You see that elementary 16 that'll be coming. That's not too far from Auburn Mountain View. It's going to be a gorgeous site as well. All right, so what I just described was more just reporting on our progress, but there's no bond on the ballot. Levies are. So you may have seen this phrase: bonds are for building, levies are for learning. And I want to talk to you about both of them briefly. The educational programs and operations levy. In the old days, we call this a maintenance and operations, M&O, but it really funds primarily educational programs. And it does two things. One is it pays for things that the state doesn't yet pay for. And if any of you know about the state's prototypical school funding model, some of the staffing ratios just don't make any sense. They're inadequate. And so we have some examples here. The dark blue bar is what we actually staff at, and the kind of golden bar is what's currently funded by the state. So what's it impact you greatly? Safety and security is a huge current need. We've invested significantly. We now have an APD, school resource officer, in all 3 comprehensive high schools. That's not funded by the state. We have 9 school security officers like Angelo, 1 in all 8 secondary schools plus a night person. Only a couple of those are funded by the state. If you think of the nurse's office, we're funded for 2.8 nurses for the entire school district. And that it doesn't compute, right? Nurse's office really critical. The medical health needs of our students are more complex and delicate with each passing year. We currently employ 13 nurses, 13 health aides, and we pay for almost all of them out of the levy. Family engagement liaisons, I think, has been a really successful add to the district to help us connect with families we haven't been able to reach as well. They're bilingual and just, I think, really have been a great add at each school that has one. We pay for most of them. We pay for all the school psychologists. And the bottom line there talks about special education. So McCleary was a lawsuit by a mom in a district that was underfunded, and the state tried to equalize funding. They did a decent job. They're not finished, but they made a lot of progress. Special education is one area that the state really hasn't finished a job on. So in Auburn, that's an $8 million gap, and that's funding that we currently take from the levy. But we need to fulfill our special education obligations. It's the right thing to do. And that IEP is a legal document that binds us to provide services. So if we didn't have the levy resources, we'd have to find that $8 million out of other pots. So we want to be able to continue to operate in special ed. Then the levy does the things that oftentimes we would assume that the levy covers. Pays for all of athletics and activities. Pays for some of our arts programs, some of our CTE program. When I mentioned, the hands that go up in the community, a lot of times these are the things that people remember that they were invested in, that brought them to school. That Auburn School District has done a great job of emphasizing and protecting. We're one of the few districts that's never had pay to play. We're one of the few districts that has really prioritized hanging on to CTE programs, and we want to be able to sustain that. So in terms of cost, the school board gives a charge to administration every time we have one of these. It says, look, the community will support us if the tax rates can be consistent and level. Sometimes we use the word flat. The way that works with the EP&O levy is it's $2.50 per $1,000 of assessed valuation, and that won't change. And I'll show you the whole tax rate picture when we're done. The other levy is the technology replacement levy. We had an ad hoc committee this summer and fall. Were any of you on that by any chance? Yeah, thanks. So we had about 30 folks, district staff, community members, parents, talking about what we wanted to put in the new tech levy. And they had two priorities. And the first is to maintain the progress that we've made. Because the truth is, if we didn't renew the tech levy, we would actually go backwards. Those Chromebooks are on a 4-year replacement cycle. We need to continue to invest in our network and some of the other devices that are part of it. But then we want to continue to grow our capacity with technology. So some things that are in the levy this time around, if it passes, that weren't in before. One is a fund at each school for innovation. So if there are ideas or things that are unique to the school that somebody wants to take on, there's a ton of money to do that. Another big area is training. So our first levy was more about the devices and the network, but we are investing in people who can come out and assist, and also in professional learning. We've done, obviously, a lot of that. I know some of you have participated in ATLA or in Tech Connect, and some really wonderful opportunities, but we want to be able to do more and get better and better with our instructional technology. And there's some really great specialized devices, and we didn't really have a way to fund those as well. So things that make learning accessible to all students, we can do more of that as well. So to get to the tech replacement levy, again, it's a flat picture. It looks a little different. This time the total collection is about $5.8 million, all 6 years. That actually plays out to a tax rate that goes down slightly over time as the assessed valuation in the entire community increases, but it's about 40 cents per thousand assessed valuation. We put all that together. The blue bars is that EP&O levy at $2.50. The orange stripe is that about 40 cents for technology levy, and the gray is our repayment on our bonds. And it's just like if you have a mortgage, this is how we borrow money as a school district to build schools and pay it back. You'll notice that the combined amount is within a few pennies each year the next 6 years. If we were to extend this picture back over the last decade, 9 out of the 10 years in the past are actually higher than what you're looking at here. There was one transition year when the new system went in and it dipped a little bit. But so we talk about keeping a flat rate, and we think we've done a good job of that. All right. The last slide is we want to enlist you in getting the word out. We want to encourage people to vote, which is part of our civic duty, and we want to inform them. And one way that you can help with the information is to follow the district on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and share posts with your friends to get the word out. And anything you do beyond that is on your own, but we really want to blanket the community with that message. We used to have coffee hours, and this day and age, it's hard to get 10 people to go to somebody's living room to see a presentation like this, but we've had a lot of success getting the word out, sharing on social media. So that's about it. Are there any questions? Well, let me take this opportunity to wish you the very best holiday, and whether you're traveling or staying here, I hope you have a chance to rest and recharge, and we'll see you back in January. Thank you.
Okay, so if you can take yourselves back to August, when we all came together, the second day, we went to Emerald Downs, and we had a fantastic presentation, PD. We listened, and we listened to what people were saying after that and during that, and we want to give more opportunities for talk, and we think those opportunities are going to come after winter break, definitely. We know that we don't want to get too many deep dives right before the holidays, but we think today's PD is going to be really important. With that said, we really want to say that it's focusing on culturally responsive teaching, and we'll be able to talk more about that in the breakout session. And I wanted to just kind of capture this. We talked about this as a PD planning team, and members from the AHS equity team, members from Atlas 3.0, members from ALOC, Jen Klasser from the district has joined us. So we had a real wide variety of people at these meetings. We ran them over 3 Mondays over 3 weeks, and been doing a lot of emailing back and forth. And we just wanted to make sure we're hitting the right chord on December 18th. We wanted to make sure the timing was right. We wanted to be really just sensitive to this time of year for everybody. We wanted to give you the right amount of stuff. So I think this group has done a fantastic job. And this is what we wanted to say about CRT, because nobody should be defined by a single story. And you're going to be talking about that in the breakout sessions a little bit. I think that's really important. I want to revisit CRT. It's not about finger pointing or finger pointing to the past or labeling. That's not what this is about. It's about helping kids. It's about raising today's kids. And that last part where it says being open and introspective or suggestive mindsets when feelings and emotions are present, that's taking you back to the compass. And we all got to see the compass, which I have it right there. And so what I'm going to ask you to do right now is just checking where you're at. It's December 18th. It's about 4:20 in the afternoon, 3:20 in the afternoon. And we're in the grind, you know that. And we're working really hard to finish the 2019 part of the school year off on a smooth note. And you guys are doing great. I just want to tell you that right now. You're doing a great job keeping our kids' eyes on the prize and just moving forward. But think about where you're at right now. As the group described the compass to you back at Emerald Downs. Are you believing? Are you thinking? Are you feeling some things right now? Are you kind of in that action or acting area? Are you kind of just balanced up? You are where you're at right now. So think about that. We're going to watch this video called The Danger of a Single Story. And I saw it a few years back, and I'd forgotten all about it. And then I pulled it out, I don't know, a couple months ago, and it resonated for me much differently. Because when I saw it, I hadn't worked in a full title in school before. So when I watched it this time, I love the presentation because the young lady who gives it was so balanced in her views. Because whatever she was pointing out, she also pointed in. And for me, that was the most important message for me. So, without further ado, we've got a 19-minute video, and then after we're done with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Roger and Stacy. And I think Mike and Glenn have a really awesome idea. Well, I know she always has awesome ideas, but are we going to get together for a group picture with our flannel at the end of this? Did I hear something about that? Michael, where's the location?
Right here.
We're going to do it on a staircase right here. So when you're all finished with your breakout sessions, okay, which we were going to try to hold for 4 o'clock, but might go over just a little bit. Go ahead.
Can we do it before the breakout, like after the video?
On our way out.
Yeah, since we're all like right here. Okay, good job. Yeah, let's do it right here. And then we're done with the video. The other thing that's going on is everybody's getting one of these. You should. It's going to tell you what room you go to for the breakout session. And we've got 10 people in every room, if everyone's here. And I'm going to ask you guys to make sure you go to the one you go to. Everyone's a fabulous facilitator. And we're going to go ahead and get started.
would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow, they ate apples, and they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them, and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamaralaye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well, and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music, and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about the charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind, white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places. But I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And, as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now, this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power. I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love, in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Ukuloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes, the immense ones such as the horrific rapes in Congo, and depressing ones such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe, and it's very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides, the US and the Mexican? What if my mother had told us that Fide's family was poor and hardworking? What if we had an African television network that broadcast diverse African stories all over the world? What the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe calls a balance of stories. What if my roommate knew about my Nigerian publisher, Mukhtar Bakare, a remarkable man who left his job in a bank to follow his dream and start a publishing house? Now, the conventional wisdom was that Nigerians don't read literature. He disagreed. He felt that people who could read would read if you made literature affordable and available to them. Shortly after he published my first novel, I went to a TV station in Lagos to do an interview. And a woman who worked there as a messenger came up to me and said, "I really liked your novel. I didn't like the ending. Now you must write a sequel, and this is what will happen." she went on to tell me what to write in the sequel. Now, I was not only charmed, I was very moved. Here was a woman, part of the ordinary masses of Nigerians who were not supposed to be readers. She had not only read the book, but she had taken ownership of it and felt justified in telling me what to write in the sequel. Now, what if my roommate knew about my friend, Fumi Yonda, a fearless woman who hosts a TV show in Lagos and is determined to tell the stories that we prefer to forget? What if my roommate knew about the heart procedure that was performed in the Lagos hospital last week? What if my roommate knew about contemporary Nigerian music, talented people singing in English and Pidgin and Igbo and Yoruba and Ijaw, mixing influences from Jay-Z to Fela to Bob Marley to their grandfathers? What if my roommate knew about the female lawyer who recently went to court in Nigeria to challenge a ridiculous law that required women to get their husband's consent before renewing their passports? What if my roommate knew about Nollywood, full of innovative people making films despite great technical odds? Films so popular that they really are the best example of Nigerians consuming what they produce. What if my roommate knew about my wonderfully ambitious hair braider who has just started her own business selling hair extensions? Or about the millions of other Nigerians who start businesses and sometimes fail but continue to nurse ambition? Every time I'm home, I'm confronted with the usual sources of irritation for most Nigerians: our failed infrastructure, our failed government, but also by the incredible resilience of people who thrive despite the government rather than because of it. I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a non-profit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign. But stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of the people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the Listening can also repair. The book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
Okay, at this point, what we'd like for you to do is reflect yourself about the video and some of the things that you just heard. And some of us have seen it more than once. I know I took away some things differently this time than I did the time before. But think about now, after watching this, where you might be in the compass. Are you believing something different? Are you now thinking on something else? What are you feeling? And maybe what it's wanting you to do as far as acting. We give you about 30 seconds to 45 seconds just to think about that.
So, I've seen this video now, I think 3 or 4 times, and the first time I saw it, I was definitely in the thinking mode. You know, had to process what was being said and think about it, and think about the kids and their stories and our, my own stories. So one thing about the compass here, it's fluid. You can be thinking at one point, and then you move to other areas, or you can be kind of a little bit of both. So I was in the definitely thinking mode the first couple of times I saw this, and I would say, I then moved to the feeling mode, and now I'm moving more into the acting, because I've had a chance to absorb it, synthesize it in my own head and my own heart, and now's the time, I think, for me to act and work to make sure that our kids are not defined by a single story. No one is ever defined by a single story, as she said. We have multiple stories, and we all need to be aware and not get caught in the trap of defining anyone by just that one single story. So in terms of my journey on this compass in this topic, I've gone from thinking to feeling, and now I'm moving into acting, which leads us now to what we'll be doing next.
So just keep that in your head as we move to our station. So now I believe we're going to get lined up over here for our picture and then head to our breakout session.